Hi everybody, Brooke Falk here, and I'm really excited to read for you today the Saga of the Family Corvidae, Episode 1, The Loser, by Marie Grace. If someone's got to be the loser here, then it might as well be me. That's actually from one of my songs, the song that you heard when you started the video. And that song is also available on Apple iTunes, just saying. But today we're actually mostly going to talk about this story, which is just the first installment of many to come, based loosely on our band, the Family Corvidae, and we're so excited to finally get to dive into this world. So, all right, here we go. Her magic was black like gunpowder, a shimmering iridescent silk. It swirled thick through the wind and roughed up the air with a chaotic fragrance of burning roses. It curled at the nape of her neck and settled like a necklace of film, taking a dip into her pores. She lifted one partly glimmering hand. Galaxy ink was dripping down her fingertips, fading into her pale wrist. Pointing one steely finger towards the pinking canvas sky, she drew a door. She took a step into a world as much its own as it was hers. They called it the Silvering, a hazy, dusty, and gray place whose sun was in a perpetual state of setting, and with a sky so brilliant with stars that it cast a silvery glow on everything the light reached, hence the name. This was a lawless country. Her slowly normalizing hands twitched for her peace, but she knew better than to show fear. The Silvering was a place for outlaws, because it was somewhere no king could rule. The border between two warring kingdoms, it was a middle ground, and the only place that didn't have a ward protecting its people. There were only two types of beings who could pass through the wards, the slingers and the reigning. The slingers, who were rare, were those who possessed galaxy ink, and were usually sold into slavery and spy for the opposite side. The reigning were what they called the royalty from both kingdoms, but they could only manipulate the wards of their own matter. She was a slinger. She was a smuggler, and she was a gunfighter, which meant that she wasn't going down without a fight and would never compromise what was hers. That's why the guards and the reignings of Lumen and Aisling could suck it. Lumen was a kingdom of industrialism, of metalwork, sparks, brilliant bulbs, gargantuan machines, the lattice work of streets, skyscrapers reaching for dreams, and rusting metals full of sunlight. The beings there were bright young things, caught up in the quickness of their own flames. Aisling was a kingdom of rolling hills dressed in emerald velvet, azure pools surrounded by timeless forests, crooked brooks, tangles of underbrush, and sprawling towers of ivory amongst the gritty paths of storybook cobblestone that dappled the landscape. It was a place of feathery light magic. The people there were eternal, fearless, and proud, no matter their magical stature. But above all else, both places were dangerous and enchanting. This point was driven home as she glanced at a wanted sign tacked to the post announcing her arrival to Inglenook. The townfolk wouldn't rat her out, but bounty hunters were always on the prowl, and she was high-paying prey. She gripped the burlap sack in her hand, metal and vines mixed within, enough materials to last her a month, fetch a pretty penny, and feed the 3 mouths she had at home. She knew she wouldn't go back to either land, or she shouldn't go back to either land, the price of being caught both as a smuggler and as a slinger too high. But a girl's gotta eat, and she wasn't the only one starving. Her husband was a lawman, strong, intelligent, and kind. She swore the stars sang when they touched. But he couldn't be caught breaking the fragile rules of their world, or the few protections her people were allowed, like surviving. They'd be completely stripped away. They must comply, being taxed by both kingdoms mercilessly, or else they would all fall. So she didn't tell her husband of her thieving, only brought home the gold they needed and said it was her skills as a fighter that won them. She had the quickest draw in all 3 lands after all. Glancing at the tattered, wind-strewn, sun-soaked, yellowing wanted sign once more that branded her rebel, rogue, and wicked, she slouched her felt hat to the brim of her eyebrows and slowed her stroll to a pace to a stroll. As she passed through town, not a single person waved. That in itself wasn't unusual, but their postures were. Their backs were turned to her, tense as they focused on their lantern-lit work. Something didn't feel right. Still, she didn't quicken her pace. She took a deep breath, The slash of yellowed fabric covering her mouth saved her lungs from rusted dust and her frown from being seen. She let loose a low, melodic whistle, sweet enough to be heard, but dark enough not to stand out. Her ravens would hear, and she would know. They never came. She broke into a sprint, reaching out to them. She let her fingers bleed black, showing off her galaxy ink, showing off her magic. She could feel them. She dug deeper, climbing into their senses. She knew by now her eyes would be swirling with stars. Her nose filled hot and sickeningly with smoke. She dove into the shadows, hoping no one saw the way she melted into them. She arrived at a little house on the outskirts of town, covered in gunpowder and blanketed in the drippings of the sky. She found her home in ruins. A gun was pressed cold against her temple. Then a cackle sounded. She knew the voice. Here to salvage the spark of what's dying, Slinger? Tears pressed hot against her eyes, still black with charcoaled flames, and she swallowed the tightness in her throat until she could whisper. You best be moving your gun, friend. I don't work for any kingdom. This was my home. Lilt raised her hand slowly above her head. I always knew there was something off about you. I've never believed the lies you told the rest of the sheep around here. I'm sure enough not going to now. What did you do? Trick him into marrying you? You'd have to have known that a love that pure and a man that strong, plus those kids, would heighten your magic beyond belief. Because the energy of the dead, especially one with heightened or pure emotions, made a slinger's power stronger. Made it where instead of traveling maybe twice or 3 times a month, Lilt's energy, her ink, would never run dry. But there was no death here, thankfully, and that form of magic disgusted her. She was strong enough on her own, without grief aiding her. Lilt whistled and brought her hands down. Then as quick as silver, she snapped the gun out of the girl's hand, twisted as the ravens descended, gripped the long barrel, its silver etchings imprinting on her hand, and whipped the handle into the girl's jaw. Sonoris was on the ground. The dust settled, and Lilt had a baroness at her feet. A scarlet line was dripping from her highness' already red-rimmed smile, and a purpling bruise was forming to match Sonoris' silken curls and cute clipped bangs. I didn't kill my family, Lilt gasped, feeling panic rise within her. But someone took them, and you're gonna help me find out who, and why. Thank you for joining me for the reading of the first episode or chapter of the Saga of the Family Corvidae. We're gonna be releasing another one very soon, so please watch for that on my page, or you can go to Marie Grace Books pages on any social media, Facebook, Instagram, etc., to download it on Kindle. You can search it on Kindle. And again, when you go there and you read this, you also find a link to listen to the song that inspired this first chapter, which is The Loser by me. So thank you so much again for joining me, and we will see you next time for another edition of the Saga of the Family Corvidae.